I'm Amira, 26 female. I live in a small apartment that always smells faintly of antiseptic, a souvenir from my job, and I share it with a temperamental ficus tree named Frank. For the past 4 years, I've been a paramedic, a job that's equal parts chaos, heartbreak, and profound purpose. It was supposed to be a stepping stone, a way to gain real-world medical experience before applying to medical school, a dream I've held since I was a child. My grandmother, the only person who truly understood that dream, left me the means to achieve it, or so I thought. This is the story of how my own family tried to burn that dream to the ground, and how I rose from the ashes to take back everything they stole from me. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. My grandmother, Evelyn, was a force of nature. She was a high school chemistry teacher who believed in the periodic table, the power of a well-baked lemon meringue pie, and me. From the time I was little, bandaging my dolls with toilet paper and diagnosing them with acute fluff deficiency, she was my biggest cheerleader. While my parents, Mark and Linda, saw my ambition as a nice little hobby, Grandma Evelyn saw it as a calling. She would buy me anatomy books for my birthday and take me to see documentaries about famous surgeons. "The world needs more healers, Amira," she'd say, her eyes twinkling. "Especially ones with your heart." My parents were different. My dad, Mark, sells cars. He lives and dies by the commission check, a life of feast or famine that always seemed to leave our family finances in a state of low-grade panic. He's a master of the charming smile and the half-truth, able to talk anyone into an extended warranty they don't need. My mom, Linda, is his loyal co-pilot. She's an administrative assistant at the local middle school, a job she's had for 20 years. She's a gentle soul, but her spine seems to dissolve in my father's presence. Her primary role in our family has always been to manage his moods and smooth things over. Then there's my younger brother, Leo. At 21, Leo had decided that a traditional career path was for lesser mortals. He was a day trader, which in reality meant he used the $5,000 my parents gave him for his 21st birthday to gamble on volatile crypto coins, mostly losing. He lived at home, contributed nothing, and treated our parents' house like a hotel with a free laundromat and catering service. When Grandma Evelyn got sick, it was fast. One minute she was arguing with me about the best way to prune a rose bush, the next she was in a hospital bed, her formidable energy fading like a photograph left in the sun. I spent every spare moment I had with her, often coming straight from a 12-hour shift, still in my uniform. We talked about everything and nothing. It was during one of those quiet, late-night conversations that she told me about her will. "I'm leaving the house to your parents, Amira," she whispered, her voice thin but firm. "They need the security, but the rest, my savings, my investments, that's for you. It's for your education. No strings, no one else's hands on it, just for you." She made me promise I would use it to become Dr. Amira, and I did, tears streaming down my face. She trusted me. More importantly, she trusted that her wishes would be honored. Her lawyer and best friend, Eleanor Vance, was the executor of the will. Eleanor was a retired librarian who was as sharp and organized as the card catalogs she used to manage. She was the opposite of my parents in every way, precise, honorable, and allergic to nonsense. After the funeral, Eleanor sat us all down in Grandma's stuffy, lavender-scented living room. She read the will, her voice clear and steady. The house, a modest but well-kept 3-bedroom bungalow, was left to Mark and Linda. A few sentimental items were left to Leo. And then came the final provision. A trust fund containing all of her liquid assets, totaling just over $150,000, was to be transferred to a new account in my name for the sole purpose of funding my medical education and living expenses during my studies. The silence in the room was thick. I was overwhelmed with gratitude and grief. My dad was the first to speak. "Well, isn't that something?" he said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Evelyn always did have a soft spot for Amira's little doctor dream. The condescension in his voice was a familiar sting. My mother just nodded, her face pale and unreadable. Leo scoffed. "$150,000 for school? What a waste. I could turn that into $1 million in 6 months. I ignored him, my heart too full to let their negativity in. Eliner handed me a folder with the bank details and a letter from my grandmother. The funds will be transferred to an account under your name, Eliner explained. However, given the complexities of probate, it will take about 3 months for everything to clear and for the money to be fully accessible to you. In the weeks that followed, my family's attitude toward me shifted in a way that was both subtle and deeply unsettling. Suddenly, they were interested in my life. My dad would call to ask about my shifts, feigning concern. "Working too hard, kiddo. Don't burn yourself out before you even get to the hard part." My mom would invite me over for dinner, serving my favorite meals and asking endless questions about medical school applications. "It's all so expensive, isn't it? The application fees, the books, the tuition, it's a good thing Mom was so generous." Even Leo was nicer, offering me unsolicited and terrible financial advice. They started talking about how they were a team, how they would all support me through this journey. They even offered to help me manage the money once it came through, suggesting they set up the bank account for me to make things easier. Red flags in retrospect. At the time, I was naive. I was grieving, and I desperately wanted to believe that my grandmother's passing had brought us closer, that they finally saw my dream as valid. I told them Eliner had it all under control, but gave them the name of the bank where the account would be opened. It felt like a harmless piece of information, a mistake that would cost me everything. The 3 months passed in a blur of overtime shifts, studying for the MCAT, and filling out applications. I felt like I was on the brink of my future, a future my grandmother had personally gift-wrapped for me. The legacy she left wasn't just money, it was a legacy of trust, a final, powerful vote of confidence in me. And I had no idea that the people I was supposed to trust most were about to betray it in the most spectacular way possible. The first sign that something was wrong was the sudden, almost manic, talk of a family vacation. It started about 2 months after the will reading. My dad brought it up during one of our forced family dinners. "You know," he said, swirling his wine in his glass with a theatrical air, "we've never had a real, proper family vacation. Not a fancy one." "Oh, Mark, we can't afford that," my mom said immediately, her voice laced with the familiar anxiety that came with any discussion of non-essential spending. "Nonsense, Linda," he boomed a little too loudly. "Life is short, we need to make memories. I'm thinking Italy, Tuscany maybe. Imagine it, sipping wine, looking out over the vineyards. We deserve it." Leo's eyes lit up. "Tuscany? Dude, the Instagram content would be epic. I'm in." I just stared at them, confused. My dad's car dealership had been going through a slow period. He'd been complaining about his commission for months. A trip to Tuscany seemed about as realistic as a trip to the moon. "Dad, how could you possibly pay for that?" I asked, my paramedic's pragmatism kicking in. He waved a dismissive hand. "Don't you worry your pretty little head about it, Amira. I've had a couple of great weeks at the dealership. Things are looking up. Besides, this is important. It's for family." He then turned his charming smile on me. "Of course, you'll come with us. A last big hurrah before you chain yourself to a desk for 8 years of medical school." The offer felt hollow. I was working 60-hour weeks and studying every spare second. The idea of a lavish vacation felt frivolous, almost irresponsible. "I can't," I said simply. "I have my MCAT in a few weeks, and I can't take the time off work." My mother's face fell with practiced disappointment. "Oh, honey, that's a shame. It would be so nice to have us all together." "Yeah, whatever," Leo muttered, already scrolling through his phone, probably looking up hashtags for Tuscan life. My dad just shrugged. "Well, the offer stands. We'll send you a postcard." The conversation moved on, but a small, uneasy seed had been planted in my mind. The casual way my dad brushed off the financial concerns, the sheer extravagance of the idea, it didn't add up. But I pushed it down. I was busy, focused on my own future. Their finances were their problem. Over the next few weeks, the trip went from a fantasy to a fully formed plan. My mom would call me with breathless updates. They'd booked flights. They'd rented a villa. Leah was buying a whole new wardrobe. Each detail she shared was like a small jab, a reminder of their sudden, inexplicable wealth. I tried to ask my mom directly how they were affording it, but she was evasive. "Oh, your father handled it all. He has his ways, you know." The day they were set to leave, they all came over to my tiny apartment, a bizarre pre-flight parade. My dad was wearing a new, ridiculously expensive-looking leather jacket. My mom had a new designer handbag, and Leah was clad head to toe in brands I couldn't even pronounce. The Y looked like they had won the lottery. "Wish you were coming, sweetie," my mom said, hugging me tightly. It felt different from her usual hugs, almost desperate. "Have a good time," I said, forcing a smile. "Be safe." "Don't worry," my dad said, clapping me on the shoulder. "We'll be living the good life for you. You just focus on those books." For the next 2 weeks, my social media feeds were flooded with their trip. Jessica, my brother's on-again, off-again girlfriend who they'd also paid to bring along, was a prolific poster. There were pictures of them at a winery, their faces flushed and happy. A video of them laughing in front of the Leaning Tower of Pisa. A shot of my dad driving a rented convertible Alfa Romeo down a cypress-lined road. Leo posted a picture of a receipt from a restaurant that made my stomach clench. The bill was over €500. They weren't just on vacation, they were living a fantasy, a life of opulent excess. Every post was a performance, a curated showcase of a life we had never been able to afford. The captions were full of hashtags like blessed, family first, and making memories. It felt like a deliberate, cruel joke. I tried to be happy for them, I really did. I told myself that maybe my dad really had closed some big deals. But the unease grew into annoying suspicion. It was the little details that didn't fit. The brand of watch my dad was wearing in one picture, the sheer number of shopping bags in my mom's hands in another. It was a level of spending that a few good weeks at a car dealership couldn't possibly cover. I called Alina Vance just to check in. It had been nearly 3 months since the will reading, and I wanted to know when the funds would be available. "Everything is on track, Amira," she assured me in her calm, methodical voice. "The probate court signed off last week. The transfer to your new account should be completed by this Friday. You'll have full access then." Friday, the day my family was due to return from their Tuscan fantasy. I thanked her and hung up, a sense of dread washing over me. The timing felt too perfect, too coincidental. A crazy, unthinkable thought started to form in my mind, a thought so monstrous I tried to push it away. They wouldn't. They couldn't. It was my future. It was my grandmother's dying wish. It was a legacy of trust. But as I looked at another photo Leo had just posted, the 4 of them raising champagne flutes on a sun-drenched terrace, a caption reading, "To the good life, courtesy of a true angel," I realized the angel they were toasting wasn't in heaven. It was me. And they had just spent 2 weeks setting my future on fire to warm themselves in the Tuscan sun. The deception was complete. All that was left was for me to discover the ashes. The Friday my family was scheduled to return was the same day Alina had confirmed my inheritance would be accessible. I woke up with a knot of anxiety in my stomach, so tight it felt like I'd swallowed a rock. I had my MCAT the next day, a culmination of a year's worth of grueling study, and I should have been focused, calm, and collected. Instead, my mind was a whirlwind of suspicion. I spent the morning trying to review my notes on organic chemistry, but the words blurred together, replaced by images from my family's Instagram feed. Around noon, I couldn't stand it anymore. I needed to know. I logged into the online portal for the bank where the account had been set up. My hands were trembling as I typed in the username and temporary password Alina had provided. I navigated to the account summary page, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. And then I saw it. The screen loaded, and for a second I thought it was a mistake, a glitch in the system. The account was there, under my name, Amira M. Revocable Trust. But the number next to the account balance was what stole the air from my lungs. $1,342.17. $1,342, not $150,000. I blinked, refreshed the page, then refreshed it again. The number remained, stark and mocking, a zero-balance future. All the air rushed out of me in a ragged gasp. I felt lightheaded, the room tilting slightly. I gripped the edge of my desk, my knuckles turning white. It couldn't be real. Frantically, I clicked on the transaction history. My blood ran cold. The history was a brutal, itemized list of my family's betrayal. The initial deposit was there, dated 3 days ago, plus $151,876.34, the exact amount a leaner had quoted. But then, the withdrawals began. A wire transfer for over $20,000 to a travel agency. Multiple large ATM withdrawals from banks in Florence and Rome, each for the maximum daily limit. Charges from luxury hotels, from Gucci, from Prada. A charge for over 10,000 euros to a car rental company that specialized in sports cars. It was all there, a digital diary of their decadence, paid for with my dreams. The withdrawals were dated over the past 2 weeks, but that was impossible. How could they access an account that was solely in my name? I scrolled through the account details, and the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place, a piece so devastating it almost broke me. Listed as a secondary account holder with full withdrawal privileges was my father, Mark. I felt a wave of nausea so intense I had to run to the bathroom. I didn't make it. The bile rose in my throat, and I retched into the kitchen sink, my body convulsing with the shock of it all. How? How had he done it? He must have gone to the bank with me when I signed the initial paperwork, something he'd insisted on, saying he wanted to make sure the bankers treated his daughter right. He must have used his smooth-talking salesman charm, convinced some unsuspecting bank employee to add him to the account, perhaps claiming I was too young and inexperienced to manage such a large sum alone. He would have framed it as a father looking out for his child. The bank would have seen a family unit, not a predator and his prey. My phone buzzed. It was a text from my mom. Landed, so exhausted. See you for dinner tomorrow night. Can't wait to tell you all about it. Zoxa. The casual cruelty of it sent a fresh wave of rage through me. I didn't reply. I couldn't. I stumbled back to my computer, my legs shaking. I printed out the entire transaction history, each page a fresh stab of betrayal. The shopping sprees, the 5-star dinners, the first-class flights, they hadn't just stolen my money, they had flaunted it. They had gleefully burned through my entire future in 2 weeks of hedonistic pleasure. The $1,000 left in the account felt like the cruelest insult of all, a pittance left over after they'd gorged themselves on my inheritance. It wasn't enough to cover a single textbook, let alone a semester of medical school. I sank to the floor, leaning against my couch, the printed statements clutched in my hand. The weight of what had happened crashed down on me. It wasn't just the money, it was the trust. My grandmother's trust in me and my naive, foolish trust in my own family. They knew what that money was for. They had sat in that room and listened to a leaner read the will. They had looked me in the eye and promised to support me. It was all a lie. A grand, elaborate, Tuscan, sun-drenched lie. The despair was a physical thing, a heavy blanket smothering me. My dream of medical school, the thing that had driven me for years, felt like it was dissolving into dust. How could I possibly recover from this? The application deadlines were looming. Without that money, it was impossible. My paramedic's salary barely covered my rent and student loans from my undergraduate degree. There was no way I could afford the tuition. I sat there for hours, the apartment growing dark around me as the sun went down. The MCAT was tomorrow. My big test, the gateway to my future. How could I possibly sit for a 7-hour exam when my entire world had been shattered? The thought of facing those complex passages and scientific problems felt absurd. My brain was static, my heart a hollow ache in my chest. They hadn't just emptied my bank account. They had emptied me. They had left me with a zero-balance future. And in that moment, sitting alone in the dark, I had never felt so utterly, hopelessly bankrupt. The worst part was that they were on their way home, expecting a happy reunion, completely oblivious to the fact that I knew their secret, and that the daughter they left behind was not the same one they were coming home to. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on my couch, the printed bank statement spread out on the coffee table like a post-mortem report of my future. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my father's smiling face in a Tuscan vineyard, a glass of expensive wine raised in a toast. The MCAT, scheduled for 8 a.m. the next morning, felt like a mountain I could no longer climb. What was the point? Even if I got a perfect score, medical school was now a financial impossibility. Around 4 a.m., something inside me shifted. The despair began to curdle, hardening into a cold, sharp-edged anger. I thought of my grandmother. I thought of her unwavering belief in me. She hadn't raised me to be a victim. She had raised me to be a fighter. Letting my family destroy me would be the ultimate betrayal of her memory. I wasn't going to let them win. I splashed cold water on my face, put on the most comfortable clothes I owned, and drove to the testing center. I walked in like a zombie, fueled by nothing but spite and caffeine. For the next 7.5 hours, I poured every ounce of my rage and grief into that exam. Every question I answered felt like a small act of defiance. They took my money, but they couldn't take my knowledge. They couldn't take my mind. When I walked out of the testing center, I was emotionally and mentally drained, but a strange sense of clarity had settled over me. The path forward was no longer about grief. It was about justice. The first thing I did was call Eleanor Vance. I met her at her tidy, book-lined condo that afternoon. I laid the bank statements on her coffee table without a word. Eleanor, ever the composed librarian, put on her reading glasses and examined the papers. Her face, usually so serene, slowly tightened into a mask of cold fury. She read through every single transaction, her lips pressed into a thin, hard line. When she was done, she took off her glasses and looked at me, her eyes blazing with an indignation that mirrored my own. "The unmitigated gall," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "To do this to you, to do this to Evelyn's memory." She stood up and began to pace. "He can't have been on the account. The trust was explicitly set up for you as the sole beneficiary. Mark has no legal right to that money." "But he was on it, Eleanor," I said, my voice cracking. "It says secondary account holder right there." "Then he committed fraud," she stated flatly. "He must have misrepresented himself to the bank. This is not just a family squabble, Amira. This is a crime." That word, crime, lit a fire in me. This wasn't just a betrayal, it was illegal. Eleanor became my general. We spent the rest of the weekend mapping out a strategy. Our first step was to go to the bank on Monday morning. We needed to understand exactly how my father had managed to get his name on my account. Walking into that bank was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. Eleanor, dressed in a sharp tweed suit, did all the talking. We met with the branch manager, a flustered man named Mr. Henderson. When Eleanor presented the trust documents alongside the bank statements showing the withdrawals, his face went pale. He scurried away to pull the account's signature cards and opening documents. When he returned, the story became clear. My father had accompanied me on the day I opened the account. After I signed my part and left for my shift, he had stayed behind, telling the young bank teller that as my father and a concerned parent, he needed to be on the account to oversee the funds and protect me from making youthful mistakes. He had charmed her, played the part of the responsible patriarch, and she, in a gross violation of bank policy, had added him without my consent or a second signature from me. The form had a space for a joint account holder, and my father's signature was right there. He had signed it while I was gone. It was clean, simple, and utterly fraudulent. The manager was horrified. The bank was now exposed to a massive liability. He offered apologies, promises of an internal investigation, but Eleanor cut him off. "Apologies are insufficient, Mr. Henderson. A grievous error has occurred, resulting in the theft of over $150,000. We will require copies of every document Mr. Mark signed that day, including the fraudulent signature card and all security camera footage from the lobby and the teller's station on that date." The manager, seeing the threat of a lawsuit looming, agreed immediately. Our next step was to gather more evidence of their spending. My brother, Leo, in his infinite arrogance, made this part remarkably easy. His social media was a treasure trove. He had documented everything. I spent an evening archiving every single post from their trip, the geotagged locations, the time-stamped photos of expensive meals, the videos of them showing off their designer purchases. I saved receipts he'd foolishly posted on his story, bragging about the cost. Each post was a digital nail in their coffin. The hardest part was confronting my parents' own financial records. Eleanor explained that if we were to pursue legal action, we'd need to prove their premeditation and their inability to afford such a trip otherwise. It felt like a horrible invasion of privacy, but it was necessary. Through a friend of a friend who worked in credit reporting, we were able to get a discreet look at their financial situation. It was worse than I imagined. They had mountains of credit card debt, a second mortgage on the house my grandmother had just left them, and my father's business account was perpetually in the red. There was no good couple of weeks at the dealership. They were broke. They had been broke for years. This discovery was sickening. They hadn't just stolen from me to live a life of luxury. They had stolen from me out of desperation, then wrapped that desperation in the guise of a lavish fantasy. They hadn't just betrayed me, they had been living a lie for years. Following the paper trail led me down a rabbit hole of deceit that was deeper and darker than I could have ever imagined. By the end of the week, I had a thick binder, meticulously organized by Eleanor, filled with bank statements, fraudulent documents, social media archives, and evidence of their dire financial state. It was a complete narrative of their crime, from conception to execution. The grieving, heartbroken girl who had collapsed on her apartment floor was gone. In her place was a cold, methodical woman with a binder full of evidence and a burning need for justice. They were having dinner at my parents', now their house tomorrow night, and I was going to be the guest of honor. With the binder of evidence sitting on my passenger seat like a ticking bomb, I drove to my meeting with Eleanor. We met at a quiet cafe, far from any of our usual spots. She had been busy while I was compiling the evidence of their spending. She'd been re-examining my grandmother's will, page by page, looking for anything we could use. "I found something, Amira," she said, sliding a document across the table. Her expression was grim but triumphant. "Evelyn was a sharp woman. She knew your father's character better than anyone. She must have worried something like this might happen." She pointed to a section deep within the will's legal jargon, a paragraph I had overlooked, my eyes glazing over during the initial reading. It was a spendthrift and forfeiture clause, but with a unique, personalized twist. It stipulated that if any beneficiary of the will were to act in a way that maliciously interferes with or attempts to defraud another beneficiary of their rightful inheritance, that person's own inheritance would be rendered null and void. Essentially, if my parents were found to have willfully and intentionally stolen from my trust fund, they would forfeit the house. It was breathtaking. My grandmother from beyond the grave had provided the weapon I needed. It was a clause of last resort, a dead man's switch designed to protect me. "But how do we invoke it?" I asked, my heart hammering in my chest. "Do we have to sue them, go to court?" "That's one path," Eleanor said, sipping her tea. "A long, expensive, and messy one. It could take years to get a judgment. But I think there's a faster, more effective way. We leverage this clause and the evidence of bank fraud to force their hand. We don't just ask for the money back, Amira. We demand retribution." Our plan began to take shape, a multi-pronged attack designed for maximum impact. It was cold, calculated, and utterly ruthless. I felt a pang of guilt, a flicker of the daughter I used to be, but then I pictured their smiling faces in Tuscany, and the guilt vanished, replaced by icy resolve. First, Eleanor drafted 2 sets of legal documents. The first was a formal letter to the bank's corporate headquarters, detailing the fraudulent activity of their employee, the negligence of the branch manager, and the resulting financial damages. It stated our intent to pursue legal action for the full amount plus damages unless the bank immediately took 2 actions: freeze every single account associated with my father, Mark, and my mother, Linda, at their institution, and file a formal criminal complaint against my father for fraud. The evidence we attached, the signed documents, the security footage stills, was irrefutable. The bank, faced with a massive lawsuit and a PR nightmare, would have no choice but to cooperate and turn on my father to save themselves. The second set of documents was for my family. It was a legal notice, drafted by a liener, outlining the breach of the forfeiture clause in my grandmother's will. It stated that, due to their fraudulent actions in draining my trust, they were now in violation of the will's terms. It gave them two options. Option A, they could sign a confession of judgment for the full amount stolen, agree to a payment plan that would garnish their wages for the foreseeable future, and immediately sign over the deed of my grandmother's house to me, in which case I would agree not to press criminal charges personally. Option B, they could refuse, at which point a liener would file a civil suit to seize the house, and the bank, under legal pressure, would proceed with its criminal case against my father for bank fraud. He would likely go to prison. It was a brilliant, vicious checkmate. We were cornering them from all sides. They could lose the house and face a lifetime of debt, or they could lose the house, face the debt, and my father would go to jail. There was no third option where they came out of this unscathed. The final piece of the plan involved Leo. We couldn't legally tie him to the bank fraud as he wasn't on the account, but his social media bragging was our proof of his complicity. For him, the punishment would be social and financial. As part of option A, my parents would have to agree to formally evict him from the house and cut him off financially. He had happily partaken in the spoils of the crime, now he would share in the consequences. He wanted to be a grown-up day trader. It was time, he learned, what it meant to have zero capital. Preparing for the confrontation was like preparing for a major trauma call at work. I had to be detached, professional, and focused on the objective. Emotion was a liability I couldn't afford. Eleanor and I rehearsed the conversation, going over my talking points, anticipating their reactions. The denial, the excuses, the anger, the tears. They will try to guilt you, Eleanor warned me. They will say you are destroying the family. You must remember, Amira, they destroyed it first. You are simply holding them accountable for their choices. The day of the dinner arrived. Eleanor had already sent the package to the bank's legal department via courier that morning, timing it so they would receive it first thing, and the wheels would be in motion before I even saw my parents. The bank's response was swift. By 3 p.m., Eleanor received a call from their frantic in-house counsel. They agreed to all our terms. My parents' accounts were frozen, effective immediately. A fraud investigation was opened. I got dressed for dinner, not in my usual jeans and t-shirt, but in a black dress and blazer. I looked like I was going to a funeral. In a way, I was. It was the funeral for the family I thought I had. IPL. Aced the thick legal notice for my parents and a separate, smaller envelope for Leo into my bag. My hands were steady. My heart was cold. There was no turning back. I was no longer their victim. I was their consequence. The Guardian's Gambit, as Eleanor had called it, was in play. All I had to do was see it through to the end. I pulled up to my grandmother's house, my parents' house, for now, just as the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the lawn she had so meticulously cared for. The irony was bitter. They were living in her house, a gift of her love and trust, while having desecrated her final gift to me. I took a deep breath, grabbed my bag containing the legal documents, and walked to the front door. My mom opened it, her face wreathed in a wide, welcoming smile. Amira, honey, you're here. We were just opening a bottle of wine we brought back from Tuscany. You have to try it. The house smelled of roasted chicken and garlic. It was a scene of perfect domestic harmony, a complete facade. My father came out of the kitchen, wiping his hands on a dish towel. There she is. How was the big test, kiddo? Ready to celebrate with your old man? He asked, his voice booming with false bonhomie. Leo was slouched on the couch, scrolling on his phone, and barely grunted a hello. They were all tanned, relaxed, and glowing with the remnants of their stolen vacation. They had no idea the storm that was about to break. The test was fine, I said, my voice flatter than I intended. But we're not celebrating. We need to talk." I walked past them into the dining room and placed my bag on the table. The shift in my demeanor was so abrupt it finally punctured their bubble of blissful ignorance. My mother's smile faltered. "What is it, honey? Is something wrong?" "Yes," I said, turning to face them. My father, mother, and brother stood there, a little tableau of guilty confusion. "Something is very wrong." I pulled the thick envelope from my bag and slid it onto the center of the dining table. "I suggest you all sit down." My dad scoffed, trying to maintain control. "Amira, what is this? Some kind of drama? We just got home." "This," I said, tapping the envelope, "is a legal notice. It details how you, Dad, committed bank fraud to add yourself to my trust account. It details how all three of you then spent $150,000 of my medical school inheritance on a 2-week vacation to Italy." The silence that followed was absolute. The color drained from my parents' faces. Leo finally looked up from his phone, his jaw slack. My mother sank into a chair, her hand flying to her chest. What are you talking about?" she whispered. My dad, however, went on the offensive. "That's a ridiculous accusation. How dare you come into our house and—" "Don't," I cut him off, my voice as sharp as a scalpel. "Don't you dare lie to me. I have everything. The fraudulent signature card from the bank, security footage of you with the teller after I left, a complete record of every single euro you spent. I have archived social media posts. I have proof that you were so broke you'd just taken out a second mortgage on this house. This house that Grandma gave you." My father stared at me, his salesman's mask crumbling to reveal the desperate, cornered man beneath. He was speechless. My mother began to sob quietly, her shoulders shaking. "So here's what's going to happen," I continued, my voice cold and even just as a leaner and I had rehearsed. "You have 2 options." I laid it all out for them. Option A and Option B, the confession of judgment, the wage garnishments, signing over the house to me. Or the alternative, the lawsuit, the bank pressing criminal charges, and the very real possibility of him going to jail. "You can't do this to us," my father finally choked out, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Amira, I'm your father, we're family." "A father wouldn't steal his daughter's future," I shot back. "And a family wouldn't toast to their good fortune while spending money meant to fulfill a dying woman's last wish. You stopped being my family when you made that first withdrawal." I then turned to my brother. I slid the smaller envelope toward him. "This is for you, Leo." Inside was a formal eviction notice, giving him 30 days to vacate the premises per the terms of my agreement with our parents. "You are 21 years old. You will no longer be living here rent-free, financially supported by the family you helped defraud. It's time to get a job." Leo just gaped at me, his entitled world collapsing around him. "This is insane. You can't kick me out." "I can and I will," I said. "This house will be mine." My mother finally found her voice, pleading through her tears. "Amira, please, we made a mistake. A terrible, terrible mistake. Your father, he was just so stressed about money. He didn't know what else to do. We were going to pay you back, we swear." "Pay me back with what?" I asked, my voice devoid of sympathy. "The money you don't have. You didn't make a mistake, Mom. You made a choice. You all did. You chose a vacation over my entire career. You chose designer clothes over my education. You chose to lie, and now you have to face the consequences." I let them sit with that for a moment, the weight of their ices finally crashing down on them in the quiet dining room. The smell of the roasting chicken now seemed nauseating. "You have 24 hours to decide," I said, picking up my bag. "Eleanor Vance will expect your signed decision by 5 p.m. tomorrow. I suggest you choose wisely." I paused at the door and looked back at the 3 of them, broken and defeated. "By the way, your bank accounts have been frozen. I'd figure out how you're going to pay for a lawyer." I walked out of that house and didn't look back. The sun had fully set and the sky was dark. As I drove away, I didn't feel triumph or joy. I just felt a profound, hollow emptiness. I had served the notice. I had executed the plan perfectly, but in doing so, I had officially cut the ties to my entire family. The war was won, but the cost was immense. The call from a leaner came at 4:55 p.m. the next day. "They signed," she said, her voice calm and professional. "Option A, the confession of judgment, the wage garnishment agreement, and the deed transfer for the house. It's all been notarized. It's over, Amira." I was at work, sitting in the driver's seat of the ambulance during a rare moment of downtime. I leaned my head back against the headrest and closed my eyes, letting out a breath I felt like I'd been holding for weeks. It was done. I had won. The house was mine. The repayment plan was in place. It would take them years, maybe decades, to pay back the full amount, but the process had begun. Justice, it turned out, was bureaucratic and deeply unsatisfying. The weeks that followed were a strange, empty limbo. My parents moved out of my grandmother's house and into a small, bleak rental apartment across town. They had to sell their cars and most of their possessions to cover their living expenses and legal fees. My father's wages from the car dealership and my mother's from the school were now being garnished. A significant portion of their income diverted directly to me each month. My brother, Leo, true to form, tried to stay with friends but quickly wore out his welcome. The last I heard, he was working a minimum wage job at a warehouse and renting a room in a shared house. The gravy train had ended. Taking possession of my grandmother's house was a surreal experience. It was filled with their things, the ghosts of their recent life. I spent a full week cleaning it out, packing their belongings into boxes that they would later retrieve from the porch, an unspoken agreement that we would not see each other. It was emotionally grueling. Every object told a story of their desperation, their deceit. I found the new leather jacket my father had worn to the airport, the designer handbag my mother had cherished. I put them in a donation bin without a second thought. Slowly, I began to reclaim the space. I repainted the walls, brought in my own furniture, and even managed to revive my grandmother's neglected rose bushes in the backyard. The house began to feel less like a battlefield and more like a sanctuary. It was my inheritance, after all, just not the one I was expecting. About a month after the confrontation, my MCAT scores came back. I had scored in the 98th percentile. That zombie-like state of focused rage had apparently been an effective test-taking strategy. I stared at the number on the screen, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of genuine hope. The dream wasn't dead. It was just delayed. With the house as my asset, my financial situation was transformed. I decided to rent it out. The income from the rent, combined with the garnished wages from my parents and my own salary, created a new path forward. It wouldn't be the easy, straightforward path my grandmother had intended, but it was a path nonetheless. I started reapplying to medical schools for the next cycle, my personal essay now imbued with a story of resilience I never wanted but now owned completely. Eleanor Vance remained a steady presence in my life. She became a sort of surrogate grandmother, a mentor and friend. We would have dinner once a month, and she would help me navigate the complexities of being a landlord and managing my now complicated finances. "Evelyn would be so proud of you," she told me one evening. "Not just for what you're becoming, but for the strength you showed." I never saw my family again. My mother sent a few tearful, rambling text messages, full of apologies and blame, which I read and deleted without replying. My father and brother remained silent. There was nothing left to say. The chasm between us was too wide, the betrayal too deep to ever be bridged. Sometimes, late at night, a wave of sadness would wash over me for the family I had lost, for the parents I wished I'd had. But the grief was always followed by a steely sense of resolve. They made their choices, and I made mine. A year later, I received my first acceptance letter to medical school. I held it in my hands, sitting in the kitchen of my small apartment, same one where my world had fallen apart. Frank, my ficus tree, was thriving in the corner. I thought about the journey, the fire I had walked through. My family had tried to reduce my future to rubble, but they had failed. They hadn't realized that rubble makes a strong foundation. I was building my future not on the easy ground of a gifted inheritance, but on the hard-won territory of my own strength. The path to becoming Dr. Amira was clear again, paved not with my grandmother's money, but with her legacy of trust in me. a trust I had finally proven I deserved.